Great. Thank you, Carrie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another series of the Future of Engineering Roundtables.
Yes.
We can hear you, Carl. I think you're with us. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I wanted to just welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. Last week at the ACEC Fall Conference, we were able to share a very few highlights from the results that we're going to share with you today. So we're excited today to be able to take a deep dive into the diversity roadmap. This is our new maturity model and benchmarking tool for DEI&B for the engineering industry. And before we get started, I do want to give a big shout out to the ZWAG group who has funded this project and made it possible for all of you to participate. So thank you very much to them for their leadership in this space. We have a great panel here with us today, and I'm excited for them to share their thoughts and views with you. We have Lori Hall, Senior Vice President, Director of Human Resources with Kimley Horn, Carrie Coker, Chief People Officer from VHB, Carl Reed, who is the Chief Inclusion Officer at the Northeastern University, and Joe Bates, our Senior Research Consultant, who is the lead researcher on this project from the ACEC Research Institute. And Kevin McMahon, another one of our research consultants, is going to moderate this session and get us kicked off. So Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Daphne. Our format today will be that Joe Bates will take us through different sections of the DEI&B study. And at the end of each section, I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll be able to forward any questions from the audience. So the questions will be very top of mind and topic oriented as we just go through the results of those different categories. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to start releasing the data.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So I have a few introductory slides to share with you all just to help set the stage. The first thing I want to share with you all is that within the tool itself, if you have not already logged into the tool and used it, you can. We have reopened it, by the way. So you can now go back in, enter your own data, and see the results of your firm versus others. So there are 4 primary sections that are used for scoring, and you see those listed here. They're workplace, workforce, marketplace, and supplier community. We're going to touch on each of those today. Then we also have information about the firm profile, which is not included in the scoring, and I do not talk about that in today's presentation, but it is in the full report that will be released in the next week or two. And then we also have the firm employee demographics, and we will talk about today as well. But again, it's not included in the scoring. So there's 4 sections that are included in the scoring. When you get your score, here's what it means. There's 4 different levels within the benchmarking study, and the top is optimizing. That is if you score between 85 and 100% on all questions. The second is managing, and that's a score of 84% to 70%, well, 70% to 84%. And then the other 2 are emerging, which is 55 to 69%. And below 55% is aspiring. So, and just keep in mind, all of this information will be available to you afterward as well, so you can read through this in a little bit more detail. So the first piece of data I want to show you all is the overall assessment scores of the roughly 200 firms that have participated in this study as of the beginning of October. And what we see here is that the quote unquote average firm, the typical firm that has participated in this study, falls into the aspiring category. And in fact, 80% of the firms who participate in this study fall into that aspiring category. Only 1% are at the top level, which is optimizing. So this is some pretty interesting overall results that I share with you just to get us kicked off.
Joe, can I ask you a question? Is there any difference with the results as it relates to firm size.
Yeah, so that was the really interesting finding from this study, is that when we look at scores, whether it's the overall score or the section scores, we do not see differences by firm size. Even at when you look at firm sizes all the way up to 500 FTE, 80% are still in the aspiring category. And when you look at the largest firms, 500 FTE and more, 70% of those firms are still in the aspiring category. So we did not expect that, but it was very surprising and interesting to see that.
What
so the next section I'm going to
get. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry, Kevin.
I was going to just ask you a quick question, Joe. What do you think those, where most firms of all sizes are in aspiring? What do you think that means for the industry?
Sorry, Kevin. Is that for me or for the panelists?
So for you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting, because I think what this shows is that there's a lot of firms that are just getting started. And when you look at the details of the data in the study, you can see that there's a lot of indicators where, okay, a lot of firms are doing, this piece, but they're not doing other advanced pieces of DEI&B yet. So, I think it just shows that there's a lot of firms who are interested and who have started down this path, but obviously there's a lot of room to grow.
Thank you.
All right, so next I'm going to show the employee demographics, and this helps set the stage for the rest of the results. What you see here are demographics of the entire firm. So we have in the report breakouts by board level, senior VP, executives, managing, technicians, and administrative professionals. So there's a lot more detail here, but what we see at the overall firm level is 68% are male, 32% are female. We also see in terms of race and ethnicity that 77% are white, and 6% are Asian or Pan-Asian, 8% Hispanic or Latino, and 3% African American. And then we look at the generational aspect of the workforce, and this was really interesting to me. I've always been hearing that millennials and Gen Z are now fully in the workforce. Well, millennials are, but what we see in engineering firms that participated in this study is that 59% of their firm employees, firm-wide, are in our millennial stage or Gen Z. So again, very interesting. And again, just so you know, we compare these results to census data as well as data from graduating engineers and in the full report. So I urge you to look at that, because it's some really interesting information there. Kevin, back to you.
Thank you, Joe. Question for the panel. How does the engineering firms' different ethnicity and generation profiles compare to the overall U.S. population?
Well, I'll take that one off first, Kevin. So what we see in terms of the general population is, for instance, roughly 50% of the general population are women and 50% are male. But we do know from census data that there are far fewer women within the engineering field than that breakout. When we look at the ethnic makeup and racial makeup, we also see that we are sort of underperforming as an industry on that level and on that metric. So that's the one where I think when you look at census data, we see the most divergency there.
Yeah, and I'll just throw out, Kevin, just one more piece on that. And thank you for this panel and the opportunity to share. So roughly 13% of the U.S. population are African American. About 18% are Latina. I think the number is around 4 or 6% for Asian American as well. So and then we also, I think the next question will be, how does that compare to those who are graduating? And I'd love to weigh in on that. But overall, we are underperforming on all levels, although there are promising signs, especially with the Latina and recent increases in the share of degrees being awarded to women as well.
Carl, just following up on that, is it better for firms to look at the overall U.S. population, or should they look at break their firm down into offices and local communities and look at their profiles in those communities compared to the community percentages of diverse potential employees.
Yeah, at Northeastern, we're actually doing both, and I would recommend that firms do that because really hiring and belonging and inclusion are somewhat localized for many firms. So the APLU, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, back in 2018 did a snapshot very similar to what Joe just shared in this report. Did a snapshot of degrees awarded by state. And I would probably look at state statistics as well. And I'll put that into the Q&A on the chat so that they be available to anyone who look at it. And so you can see state by state, the degree, the population by race and gender and identity, and then the number of degrees being awarded by state, and to see where there are gaps as well. But I do recommend that firms do look at their location by state, in some cases by region, to see what the breakdown is, and then compare those hiring as well as the overall employee population based on those data.
Great, thanks, Carl. Lori and Kerry, most firms are transitioning from leadership from baby boom generation to millennials, and Joe mentioned the large amount of millennials and Gen Z going on. Do you folks see a big difference in diversity in those generations compared to the baby boomers?
We sure do. Yeah, we sure do. We have a really robust college recruiting program at Kimley-Horn. We're hiring hundreds and hundreds every year. And actually, our average age at Kimley-Horn is quite younger even than what you showed in your slide, Joe. And we are seeing a difference. We are seeing some of this is I think consistent with other younger generations in the past, right? There's something that's always true about being 24 and is always true about being 54, right? That really kind of transcends time. But I think we're seeing a greater interest from our Gen Z hires in diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging for sure. That is a really critical part. They want to know that we take it seriously. They want to feel like they belong. They want to see action. They want to be part of the action, right? Which is also great. But yeah, far more than I would say some of the other generations in our workforce, at least.
Mm-hmm. Kerry, would you concur with Lori's assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's been gratifying to see is this shift, and, over time, obviously, folks that are in those entry level or, maybe a junior PM, as they grow in the organization, we're seeing, more diversity, more females. We're really proud to see that at VHB, we've reached 39% women, which I know when I first started at VHB, it was just got into the double digits. So, it's been a big shift there. And I completely, agree with Lori, having a robust college program that's really, focused on and partnering with the schools so that, people coming out of academia and into our firms can see that that we have programs in place that will support them, that will help them continue to grow and learn, and just really foster that inclusive environment. And that's really important to show for young folks coming into our firms.
Thanks so much, Kerry.
Sorry, can I just add one thing to?
Yeah,
Carl, I think brought up some really good points about how to. What you should compare your workforce to in terms of statistics and numbers. I would also include the National Association of Colleges and Employers, NACE. If you're not a member organization, I think their data is still available to you, although I'm not sure about that. So, but we regularly kind of look at what the availability is in terms of our civil engineers specifically and compare that to what we're hiring. And we use that as a strong benchmarking tool.
There's one other point I'd love to make, Kevin, and that is a lot of the data that you can find out there It also is broken down by engineering discipline, and within the gender field in particular, some data I looked at, there's big differences in the gender diversity in certain, engineering fields. So environmental, for instance, there's a lot more women who are graduating with those engineering degrees compared to aerospace, for instance.
Great point, Joe. Carl, last question on this topic. You mentioned earlier that, about the profile of students that are graduating. I want to ask you to just maybe expand your answer to the industry often talks about we need a bigger pipeline of candidates. And how important is it for folks that get into engineering programs to have enough financial support to, make it through to the graduation lane? Can you talk about that?
Yes, so I spent a fair amount of time with United Negro College Fund, UNCF, and we had a Patterson Research Institute. UNCF gives $100 million in scholarships a year. And so we had a really great database to look at the impact of scholarships on graduation rate. And we found that this was back 15 years ago, probably 10 years ago now, 10 to 15, that just $5,000 awarded to a freshman increases the likelihood, and this was an African-American freshman, increase the likelihood that he or she or they would graduate in 5 years by 8 percentage points. So classic regression analysis that we were able to do, that really money matters, right, in making that. But I would argue that that's not enough. I mean, we partnered with Northrop Grumman, Cummins, Honeywell to provide what we call integrated pipeline. So money is important, but it's not enough. You have to kind of provide mentoring, professional development, internship opportunities, and other ways that students can really see themselves in their career. I think was it Lori or Joe talked about belonging, the importance of belonging. It is very, very important for populations that are in this field who may not have personal examples of engineers in their household or in the communities as well. You can't be what you can't see. And so really creating these opportunities, engineering these opportunities for these serendipitous connections are critical for students to succeed. The last thing I'll say really very quickly is it's not an excuse to say that there's nothing in the pipeline. There's been a gradual and dramatic increase in the share of degrees being awarded to women and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color in engineering over the last 10, 11 years. And so it's just a matter of building the relationships and finding those rich opportunities in terms of minority serving institutions and other predominantly white institutions that have been very successful at producing degrees from these populations.
Excellent thoughts, Carl. I love that "you can't be what you can't see" tagline. We should probably get a patent on that one. Back to you, Joe, for some more data.
All right. I'm going to share screen again here. It might take a second for it to sync up for you all, but we're going to talk about data that we received on the workplace. This section assesses how diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are integrated into your firm's company culture. So I'm only going to show you a couple slides from the many, many pieces of data that we have in the full report. But the first one here is that we still see within this section of the benchmarking tool that most firms still fall into that aspiring category. There's fewer firms in the aspiring category when it comes to just looking at workplace, more in emerging and more in managing. So the average scores are just a little bit higher overall here. And one of the key questions we ask in this section is, does your firm have a DEI&B strategy? And we see that 36% of firms currently have a strategy in place, but 35% say that it's in progress. So that sort of helps to understand why we have so many firms in the aspiring category, but this makes it look a little bit more optimistic that at least firms are starting to implement strategies overall. We also see, and there's a few questions about this, but this is one of them, asking about whether the CEO or the leader of the firm talks about and demonstrates their commitment to DEI&B. Because as we know, this and many other types of initiatives, it starts at the top. And we do see that 68% of firm presidents or CEOs always or often demonstrate their commitment to DEI&B. However, the other question we asked was about folks just one level down, and that number drops quite a bit. So, that kind of helps you understand that, well, having a strategy in place is great. Having a CEO talk about these things is great, but you've really got to start to integrate it further down into your culture. And the last slide I'm going to show on this section is how often do you at your firm make information available about the demographic diversity of your employees and leadership. And this is just asking about internally, not even externally. And we see that about 40% or so, 43% of firms do provide this information internally, at least annually. So we'd like to see that be more on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. But again, this again is a good place to show you, hey, we've got some areas where we can improve in firms. All right, Kevin, back to you.
Thanks, Joe. Let me start with Lori and Kerry to ask this question. If the firm CEO is demonstrating his or her commitment to DEI&B, but the senior management team is not, I mean, it strikes me as that's a big problem. What do you folks think about that? And is it even worse that you have this big dichotomy in the senior leadership team?
You want to go, Kerry?
Sure, I'll go. First of all, I want to say, I'm really proud to have an amazing partner in our CEO, Mike Carragher, who also is president of the Research Institute. He's been a big advocate and a partner with me on DEI&B at VHB. And it was, hey, look, from his standpoint, it was, we're learning about this and we're growing about it. And I expect all of you to learn and grow and for, to take this on. So we're constantly having conversations around how are we mitigating bias in employment decisions, in pay decisions. And so we're constantly keeping it at the forefront of conversations that we're having at the executive committee. So our leaders know that it's important and they need to follow suit. Lori?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kerry, and I have a very similar experience. Our chairman, Steve Lefton, also a huge champion of diversity and inclusion and our efforts, and is a vocal champion of that, right? So doesn't just say it when asked, but outwardly demonstrates it through how he acts and the messages he regularly delivers. I will say that it's been interesting to watch our leadership team, if you will, who come from lots of different places around the country. They come from lots of different religious backgrounds, personal beliefs, those kinds of things. And it has been, it's been hard sometimes, right? When you're faced with a question or with a situation and you're trying to make a good decision for your firm and everyone in your firm, and you have those competing or, unaligned, even not even just competing, but unaligned personal belief systems. What I'm proud of is the way that we've handled that at our leadership level, because we talk things out, we stay calm. I think our demonstrating the fact that you can talk these things out, there may not be a perfect solution, but we're about civility, we're about respect, and we want our employees to mirror that. And I think it's been a good thing for our leadership folks to have to navigate through, because I think they can understand how difficult it is for the rest of the firm. And then again, set the kind of example we want to set for other people to be able to engage in those conversations too.
Great answer, Lori. Hey, Carl, I wanted to ask you, sort of as a industry outsider, so to speak, but from a very academic background, if 2/3 of the firms have a strategy, but the majority are aspiring, just getting started, what does that tell you about our industry compared to academic institutions or compared to other industries that you know about?
Yeah, great question. First of all, I am an engineer, so I forgot to mention that, and materials engineer, and spent 12 years in industry before jumping back into academia. So a little bit of a unicorn as well. Two things I would really point out. One is only 190 firms participated in the survey out of all. So even though 2/3 are saying they're in progress or they're making progress, or at least a third say they're making progress, I would sort of ask the question and really be interested to hear among the panel, among those in the audience, the Q&A, why didn't you participate? Why didn't your firm participate? Because we're only getting a snapshot of those who are willing to participate, whereas the majority are not. I would also say that this is a journey. I think it's so well put, perhaps by Lori, in that this is an ongoing conversation that has to be established. That we call it at Northeastern the discourse community, where we won't have all the answers, and leaders have to demonstrate that they're willing to be in a place that they can learn. But they have to be very clear, as Kerry pointed out, that there is a commitment from leadership that we're to do this. And the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine produced a report earlier this year that talked about the importance of leadership in advancing anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion in STEM organizations as well. But the other piece that was raised here was what I call the frozen middle. So usually leadership gets it. Most people don't aspire or assume a leadership position in an organization, whether it's a university or a corporation, a CEO, without at least being able to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging these days. We heard the stats from the Gen Z. And then the incoming employees get it because they are the Gen Z. They are the ones who really have a much more multicultural experience growing up. It's just the middle. It's the professors, the faculty members, it's the middle managers that have pressures above and pressures below. And I call that the frozen middle. And in those cases, we really have to make the case for why it's important, why diversity, equity, inclusion, what's in it for them as well as put structures in place to ensure that the practices and the policies are really aligned with the DEI&B strategy as well.
Carl, great point. And if I could just add, really putting those structures in place, because if I go back to that slide and I look at, 2/3 have a strategy, but we're still at aspiring, the people in the average ACEC member firm that are tasked with delivering on DEI&B programs are also the same people like Lori and myself, which are, dealing with compensation compression issues, that are dealing with the war on talent, that, dealt with a global pandemic, right? So the average firm doesn't have dedicated resources or that structure that Carl's talking about in place to move the needle in as fast as we want to. And so I don't want anyone to think that, hey, we're aspiring and that work isn't getting done, because I think that, maybe in a business cycle, in a business planning cycle, that, firms are only be able to advance 1 or 2 initiatives. And, to be able to hit some of those higher levels, you need to be, hitting it at a number of other things too. So I think that, really just to follow up on Carl, like putting the structures in place to be able to move the needle significantly is important.
Great follow-up, Carrie. Lori, I wanted to ask you, I think a lot of the folks perhaps on this call are very interested in progressing their firm strategy, but may be stalled, maybe trying to figure out how do I get over this hump in this next hurdle. Do you have any advice for firms that feel like they made some progress, but now they're just searching for how do I accelerate the progress?
Yeah, I would start by saying don't despair. So just because you may have, fallen off the rails or hit a plateau or whatever word you want to use, that doesn't mean that that's where it needs to stay, right? And there's lots of times where I, in my own journey helping this effort at Kimley Horn, have felt that, right? That we're just not moving fast enough. We really wish we were further ahead than where we are now. I think Carrie just made a really great point. Even if you can only do these couple of things because of all of the other things that are on your plate, still do those things, right? So don't get wrapped up in having or feeling like you have to solve all of this in the next year. Carl, you said it, this is a journey. This is something that honestly is going to outlive you, right? This effort, the hour can, and it's dynamic, it changes we have to adjust. We have to continue to be agile. So I'd say keep that big picture in mind, right? All of these things that we're trying to accomplish can't be accomplished overnight. So it just requires a little bit of staying power and that keeping that philosophy in mind. The other thing I'd say is tap into the folks in your organization. Hopefully it's, your primary leader, your president or chair, and other people, but tap into those folks, keep them engaged in the conversation continuously, draw on their energy, share it with other people, right? Because I love Carl was said frozen middle. That's so true, right? And sometimes people just need a little bit of inspiration in order to get behind something. So tap into the people who really feel strongly about this for your company, and kind of together start to plow forward. That might sound a little easier, a little cheesy, I don't know, but I think it works. I think just doubling down on the interest and the passion that people have can actually take it pretty far.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we'll move on to the next topic, but Carl's frozen middle reminded me of, we used to call it the clay layer, as it related to communication strategies. And so I think the message for leadership is just keep promoting the vision. The team needs to hear it more than once. Joe, back to you for the workforce, and then Daphne, after the session, I'm going to see if there's any questions from the audience after Joe goes through the slides.
All right, great. So we have here the workforce section, and this section assesses employee recruitment and retention policies. And I think what's really interesting here is, again, we see a lot of firms, even more firms than overall, they're struggling a bit in this area and are in that aspiring category. This is the one section where it's the highest level of aspiring firms. So here's some areas where we really have, some room to grow. And I, again, want to reiterate that the tool is open again. So if you have not participated, you can go in, answer the questions. And when you are finished answering all the questions, you will get a report. It's a Word document that you can download. And it's why we call this the diversity roadmap. That report will give you specific action steps that you can take and a checklist for each of these areas, so that you can say, what of these can I do, to Lori's point, and do those in the next year. So one of the questions we have on this section is whether firms are evaluating employee performance when it comes to their behavior and creating a safe and inclusive work environment. And we see that 64% of firms say that they always or often consider employee DEI&B behavior when evaluating performance. We also ask, what types of data is your firm gathering and analyzing? And there's a couple points I want to make here. One, we see 31% of firms aren't gathering or analyzing any of this type of data. And this is one of those areas where larger firms are much more likely to be gathering and analyzing data than smaller firms. But the most common piece of data that firms are gathering is about employee demographics, compensation, and other data required to comply with regulatory environments. So again, you can see that there's a variety of things here that you can be doing. And in the scoring, the more of these you do, the better your score. We also see, this is my last slide for this section, that 60% of firms are utilizing multiple third-party websites to post open roles. So again, that's sort of another best practice to make sure that you are advertising your opportunities for employment to as wide an audience as possible. And then we also see almost as many firms say that they're evaluating and writing job descriptions to remove bias. So that's obviously a very good step to take as well. There's a lot of other things here, again, that you can and should do. And each one of these, every time you say, yep, I can do that at my firm, or we're doing that at our firm, that's going to improve your score overall. All right, Kevin, back to you.
Thank you, Joe. A lot of really good information here. Let me ask the first question, then I'll turn it over to Daphne to see if she's got a good one. The first question I have is, how specifically, I think a lot of the folks that we've learned on these webinars want to know specifics. How specifically are firms considering individual employees' DEI&B performance when evaluating their overall performance, and do employees think these evaluations are fair? Carrie or Lori, you want to start with that? Then I'll ask Carl about at Northeastern his experience.
Yeah, I can start off, Lori. I think that there's a number of direct and indirect ways that that we're seeing this. One sort of indirect way is many of us will participate or run a sentiment or employee engagement survey, and you can cut that in multiple ways. And there are a number of really rich diversity and inclusion related questions that are involved in that. And you can parse that out by office, by region, by manager, and it gives us really good data to see, are our employees feeling respected? Are they heard? Do they feel that their benefits and pay are equal? And so that's a great opportunity for us in HR to be able to look at that and then make significant changes or add or do things to be able to improve behavior, through the organization. So I'll offer that. Lori, do you have other ways that you're looking at this specifically?
Yeah, this might sound anathema to some people, but we don't have formal performance evaluation structures or policies, I guess, in place. We do things a little different. But what we have built in, we have a process called a My Career process, which is designed depending on what your role is in the firm and what your tenure is, how many years of experience you bring. You participate in various check-ins during the year with your supervisor. So recently, actually we did it last year, but we've since reworded it to hopefully get richer information. We've added a question to the My Career check-in, predominantly for our more Gen Z, later, I guess, millennials, whatever, younger millennials, to be able to use to provide feedback that actually their supervisor doesn't get directly as part of the My Career check-in. It goes to HR directly, and it talks about, do you feel like you belong here? What suggestions do you have? What struggles are you having or frustrations? It goes directly to HR, so HR can kind of intervene if that employee isn't feeling that sense of connection, and frankly can help the supervisor and hold them accountable for improvement. So we're trying to build in some things. Again, we don't have a formal rating process that we use to evaluate our employees, but we're trying to build in things along the way, whether it's what I've just described or encouraging people to talk about their efforts, promoting diversity, inclusion, and belonging in their self-write-ups when it comes time for bonuses and those things. So just trying to incorporate this in lots of different places throughout the course of the year.
Great advice, Carl.
The only thing I'll add, and really, as the young people say, +1 on the climate surveys and engagement surveys, because really at the end of the day, diversity, equity, and inclusion is a means to an end. And that's creating a welcoming, inclusive climate where people feel a sense of belonging, where they can thrive, right? That's ultimately what we want to get to. You really achieve that through diversity, equity, inclusion. It's we said at the ACEC, the advisory council, don't stop at the D in DEI&B. So climate surveys, overall climate, to kind of assess where we go and disaggregated by groups. That's what we have done here at Northeastern. We've rolled that out to the senior leaders of the university. We provided them with their results against university averages and asked them to develop 3-year action plans to address or redress some of the gaps in belonging that they experience as well. And then I think some of the firms can really think about, how can we correlate some of these results with the things that are also important, like hiring, promotion, turnover, et cetera, and really see that if we are moving the needle on climate, climate and culture and inclusion and belonging, we're actually also moving the needle on hiring and promotion equity, on reducing turnover, on increasing employee satisfaction, et cetera. And those things are really important, those things that you report to the board of directors, right, as well. So I think there's a correlation that's important. And some universities are doing it well. We're doing it on tenure, but we haven't implemented it on employees yet. that's our next big goal that we're working toward here at Northeastern.
Thanks, Carl. Daphne, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, this actually goes back, Kevin, to the last topic that we covered, but I think it's a good one to talk about. Lori was talking about tapping into leadership's energy to help drive these initiatives. And so the question is, what if your leadership isn't on board with embracing DE&I? And I know Carrie and Lori, both of your leaders are, but maybe you have some thoughts about, or maybe you've had conversations with some of your colleagues in other firms, or maybe Carl has something to share about, some ideas of what to do. Again, as Kevin said, this audience loves to know, tell me something really specific. What can I do to get over that hump?
I think it depends on the realm at which the person isn't supportive, right? If they're an obstructionist, you may want to take a different tactic than if they're just indifferent. And, if they're just indifferent, I think a little education could go a long way. I think there's the ACEC DEI&B group is working on a business case that will help, member organizations be able to state that very easily, why it's important that we continue our efforts. And so I would lean in to that, the fact that this is good for our bottom lines every bit as much as it's good for our collective psyche. So I think that could be a tool. I think if someone's an obstructionist, that's a good question, and I think that that could be a series of really tough conversations with whoever your leader is, and really just kind of sorting out on a personal level why it might be that way. Why they might feel the way that they feel. Is there fear behind their failure to get behind these efforts, and what is that fear? And just try to kind of pick it apart that way.
I would just add that a lot of the DEI&B efforts and just sort of behaviors, we tie them back to our company core values. Excuse me, I'm about to cough. Sorry. So if it's a behavior related, like Lori said, if it's an obstructionist, that is a performance related thing. You can get at it in a number of ways. But tying it back to behaviors of your own core values makes it a little bit easier to talk about for some people. So that's one way that we've used it to help. I think another way, when we've been stalled before, and something that really came out during the pandemic, when we were trying to come together and create more of a community because we weren't in the office, was we were doing more Zoom calls, and we were doing more coming together and sharing. And so continuing to lean into learning. And one of the ways that you learn is learning about everybody's lived experiences. And the more that we were sharing on these calls, the more that people could understand some of the bias, excuse me, that was coming out. And that was, definitely leaning into learning and sharing openly our leaders about their lived experiences. Excuse me.
Thanks, Carrie. Let me ask a different question. Carl mentioned belonging often in his comments, and I 100% agree. More firms have a strategy than analyze employee demographics. We're all trying to increase our diverse pool of employees. But the engagement surveys that we do are only 27% of firms do surveys relative to employee demographics and diverse employees. So it seems to me there's a huge opportunity, not just for diverse employees, but for everybody, to get a sense of characteristics and their feeling of belonging, to make sure that if we recruit them, they stay, because of the extreme, cost and scarcity of just good employees in all categories. So Carl, can you just address that? It strikes me that this is a huge opportunity for our industry to dive into our employees' belonging and engagement characteristics to drive improvements and also better retention statistics.
And Kevin, I'm glad you raised this. I've often said that belonging is a fundamental human need. And actually, it wasn't me. It was Maslow, right? The hierarchy of human need. After you get food and shelter, and water and air, the next thing is belonging. It's a fundamental need that we all have. And when we have that, then we have the higher levels, around cognitive growth and self-actualization, et cetera. And we all know what that feels like when we're in a set setting, when people really affirm you for who you are and bring about the best as well. And so there are a couple of really good engagement surveys. The Nielsen folks, I can't remember the Q12 survey around belonging, very quick 12 questions that really can assess whether or not the people really do feel that sense of belonging from their manager as well as from their peers as well. And then again, I always say that it's not just enough to get the data, to really begin to correlate those to business outcomes as well. The things that really matter to a company around their market share, their employee satisfaction, their turnover rates, et cetera, and to see if there is a correlation or causation between these kinds of efforts around engagement and the business outcomes. And McKinsey has done a really good job of that. The McKinsey study in 2021, the white paper that asked the question, does inclusion really matter? And they've demonstrated companies that have diversity, that have sort of a focus on inclusion and belonging, have also higher financial outcomes, earnings before interest and taxes, all the things that really matter as well. So we at Northeastern has made belonging the leading edge of our diversity, equity, and belonging strategy, especially in light of the recent SCOTUS ruling, the Supreme Court ruling. We can make the case that everybody needs belonging as well. And that helps us navigate some of the politics as well that we're seeing around the country.
Great.
Hey,
Thank
Kevin,
you.
I just wanted to tag on to Carl, and Joe had made the comment earlier on about this assessment report that you get as a result of going through the maturity model and answering the questions. So it's a 19-page report. In the back of it, there are 2 full pages of resources, and a lot of the different things that have been mentioned already on this call are listed there with links. So it's a really great resource to have to start looking into some of these, the McKinsey study and some of these other things. There's a list of those resources available.
Thank you. Joe's going to take us through the next 2 categories, but it strikes me as belonging is maybe the new frontier for a lot of our challenges on the people fronts in all of our firms. Joe, back to you.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go through the last 2 sections very quickly, and then the remainder of the time we'll leave for other discussion. So the third scoring section in this tool is Marketplace, and this section assesses the organizational approach to marketing and promotional campaigns. It is a fairly short section, and you can see here that this is actually the section where firms are, as on a whole, they are performing better than in the other areas. Excuse me. So you see here, 60% of firms are in the aspiring category, but we actually have 11% of firms who are optimizing, 18% managing, and 11% emerging. So the average scores here are quite a bit higher. And a few reasons for that are the questions that we have in this section. One of them is, your firm includes DEI&B strategies when pursuing work. And we see that half of firms say that they are doing this. Either, they agree or strongly disagree with that statement. And not as many firms are disagreeing with that statement. Another question we ask is that your firm reviews marketing and advertisement campaigns to ensure that they are not offensive or perpetuate negative stereotypes toward any demographic. This is the one question which really helps pull up scores in this section, because you can see half of firms, more than half, are doing it all the time. Another 20%, 7% are doing it most of the time. So this is a really key metric on this particular section. And then we also see that 59% of firms agree that they respond to their clients' culturally and geographically diverse needs. So some really interesting information there when it comes to how you're marketing your firm. The last section that I'll go through quickly is supplier and community. This assesses the organizational approach to engaging diverse members of the community. So we see here, this is one, again, of the lower performing sections. 87% say they are aspiring in this area. The average scores are fairly low here as well. And one of the questions is, when firms are pursuing public or private work, your firm is asked to articulate its commitment to DEI&B. What we see here is a really interesting difference between private and public. So firms who are, and when they're asked about private, only 11% say they're always or often asked, and they're all fall in that often category, whereas public work, it's 32%. So really, really big difference here between private and public work. We also see that half, 46%, almost half of firms say that they consider diversity of sub-consultant ownership, even if not required by the client. So that's the sort of key number there, is not being required. And we have almost half of firms that are still doing that. 35% say, no, we just do that when we are required to do it. And then finally, your firm is vocal in supporting DEI&B interests in the community by. So the most common method that firms are supporting their community is through volunteering their employee time and labor in community projects that impact underserved populations. So almost 2/3 of firms are saying they do that. 75% of firms are doing something in this area. And again, the more of these things you do, the better your DEI&B score is going to be. All right, Kevin, with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Joe. I'd like to ask this one question of the panel. The statistics regarding the interest in diverse sub-consultants is markedly different for people that are in the public sector sphere of work versus private sector. Huge differences. If you have a firm that has 50% public and 50% private, it seems to me you might have 50% of your employees that are more concerned with diversity and who their partners are than the other 50%. Lori and Carrie, is that true? And how do you address that internally to get, the message of all employees up to the same level?
I would say in general, our public sector serving employees are more acutely aware of diversity as an importance in what they do, how they're problem solving for their client, how they're showing up to our clients, than our private sector. I do think, again, going back to our demographic and having a lot of Gen Z folks in our workforce, we still have a number of private sector people who are still interested, though, in diversity and inclusion. I would go back to Carl's frozen middle. I think that's the big challenge for us, frankly, are the people who are private sector focused, haven't really grown up with diversity being top of mind, and it's harder for them to wrap their brains around sometimes why this is good for business. I will say this kind of tangentially relates. We've been actually seeing more interest from the private sector, including from some of our national private clients, asking us to sign their diversity pledges, which has been interesting to kind of read through what they're stating, what they're asking us to do. I've seen a major uptick in that activity over the last 2 years than I had seen in my time here prior to that.
I agree, Lori. One of the things that we've been seeing too is we've even actually seen where a client has said, we'd like to look and know the demographics of the team that's going to be working on our project. We want to ensure that your team reflects the demographics of our community. And so I think that, Kevin, while yes, it's more been a focus on public, that private sector, it's sort of raising the bar for everybody. And, and regionally, there's, some of the regions, major metros, definitely more focused on it. And so it's sort of raising the awareness for everybody.
Great. Carl, last words on this topic, and turn it back to Daphne. It strikes me that we still need to communicate the benefits of diversity to our employees as it relates to this topic, that it's not just a requirement, but there's an actual benefit in many ways. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Diversity in engineering really shapes the problem we pursue, right? In terms of the kinds of problems that we seek to solve and work on. It shapes the kind of approach to the solving the problem, because it really makes us much more culturally aware and relevant as well. And then it also improves the process as well. And that's what Scott Page has found out, that when teams are diverse, when innovation and problem solving are the goals, they tend to produce better results. And that has been demonstrated, quantitatively demonstrated as well, because no one has expertise in one area. But when you bring groups together, you really create a birthplace of new ideas.
Great final words. Daphne, you have the ball.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Well, first of all, I want to share with you all a QR code that you can use. So those of you who have not yet gone to use the diversity roadmap, this is a QR code that will get you there. If you need any help identifying who has login credentials from your firm, please reach out to Carrie or myself, and we will get those set up for you. But we do want to encourage you to go in and use this tool. I'd also like to again thank the ZWAG group for their support of making this possible. We couldn't have done it without them for sure. And also share with you some future of engineering roundtables that we have coming up this fall. So we are going to be diving in next month to 2 studies that we released last fall, one on the economic update and the forecast, and the second one on the Q4 sentiment study. So those are both coming up in November. And then in December, we're going to take a fair and balanced approach to looking at private equity in engineering firms. So we've got a great lineup of panelists who are going to talk about the reasons they've done it and those who have strongly decided not to. And I think it'll be some really interesting conversation. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Lori, Joe, Kevin, Carrie, Carl. Appreciate all your insights, all the great data that you've shared with us, and look forward to seeing you on our next session. Have a great afternoon and stay well, everyone.